They say your gut knows before your brain catches up. I'd always thought that was some kind of nonsense, something people told themselves to feel better about their own failures of observation. Turns out, my gut was smarter than I gave it credit for. It all started with Claire's phone. Simple as that. For the better part of 10 years, her phone was something she barely looked at. I mean, it was there, she used it, but it was like background noise, no more important than her wallet or the keys she could never find. That's why, when I noticed her glued to it one Thursday night, I should have paid more attention. But I didn't. Not at first, anyway. We were watching some mindless reality show, one of those where overconfident chefs scream at each other about caramelizing onions, and Claire was sitting across from me on the couch. Now, usually, she'd be making some comment about how she could make the same dish better. But instead, she was quiet, face lit up by her screen. Her thumb was doing that nervous dance, scrolling through something a little too fast to be casual. "Work stuff?" I asked, glancing over without much thought. "Oh, yeah, just some emails," she replied, her voice a bit too neutral, like it had been rehearsed. I shrugged it off at first. But then it happened again. And again. Over the next few weeks, I noticed her phone practically attached to her hand at all hours, which was unusual. Claire wasn't the type to care about social media or random notifications. But suddenly, she was taking her phone with her everywhere. Even to the bathroom. The bathroom. I mean, we've been married long enough for bathroom privacy to be more of a suggestion than a rule. Yet, here she was, acting like she needed a security clearance to check her messages. Red flag number 1. Of course, that didn't immediately send me into a spiral of suspicion. No, the real kicker came when she started working out. Yeah, you know where this is going. Claire never cared about fitness. She'd roll her eyes every time I dragged myself to the gym and say, "You're going to pull something, and I'm not going to nurse you back to health." But all of a sudden, she was hitting yoga classes twice a week. Then it was 3 times. Then she was jogging, although her running shoes looked suspiciously like they hadn't seen pavement in months. Good for her, I thought. I even encouraged it after all. Who doesn't want their spouse to be healthy? But something about the timing of these newfound habits felt off. She wasn't just working out, she was glowing. Every time she came back from these so-called exercise sessions, there was this satisfied smirk on her face. Not the kind of glow that says, "I just did some cardio," but more like, "I just did something, and I probably shouldn't tell my husband about it." Red flag number 2. Now, I know what you're thinking. Daniel, come on, people get healthy. People change. And yeah, you're right. But let me ask you this. If someone's changing, why keep it so secretive? And then there was Adam. Adam, the golden boy at the office, the guy everyone liked. You know, the type charming enough to make you question why you can't quite trust him. He'd started acting weird around me. Whenever Claire and I would attend a work function, Adam would linger a little too long in conversation, his hand resting on my shoulder like we were best pals. His compliments to Claire were always a bit too polished. I'd seen it before in the workplace. The over-eager guy who's trying to befriend you just a little too much. I brushed it off as paranoia, but something kept nagging at me. Adam was always there, and Claire seemed to enjoy his company just a little too much. A few too many inside jokes shared between them, the kind where I was clearly the outsider. But it wasn't until I saw the text message that I knew for sure. It was a Friday afternoon. I'd gotten home early and Claire was in the shower. Her phone, the one she now treated like a national secret, was sitting on the counter. Now, I don't snoop. Never have. But when a message pops up on a locked screen and it's from A, and says, "Can't wait to see you later," winking face, well, that's a big red flag number 3. I stared at it for a solid minute, my brain spinning. Claire didn't know anyone else whose name started with A. And emojis? Claire never used emojis. She used punctuation like she was writing an essay for her doctorate, yet here was a winky face. A winky face. It didn't take a genius to put 2 and 2 together. Claire was cheating on me with Adam, my own work colleague, the smug bastard who'd been hovering around as like a bad smell. My first instinct was pure, white-hot rage. I could have stormed into the bathroom, yanked open the shower door, and demanded an explanation right then and there. But I didn't. No, I did something much more dangerous. I stayed calm. The thing about anger is that it burns out quick. But patience? Patience is lethal. I wasn't going to lose my temper. I wasn't going to give Claire and Adam the satisfaction of knowing they'd rattled me. Instead, I took a breath, pocketed that little nugget of information, and made a decision. I wasn't going to confront them. No, I was going to catch them in the act. But not in some sloppy, cliché way like bursting into a hotel room. No, if I was going to do this, it was going to be calculated. Precise. Devastating. And I was going to make sure they never saw it coming. I started paying closer attention to the details. Claire's workout schedule wasn't just random, it was consistent. Tuesday afternoons and Friday mornings were her favorite yoga days. Adam had a suspiciously flexible schedule at work, often ducking out for long lunch meetings on those same days. Once I knew the patterns, it was like watching a poorly written movie unfold. They were practically advertising their affair in broad daylight. But instead of tipping my hand, I played the part of the clueless husband. I even encouraged Claire to take more time for herself, watching her squirm under the weight of my fake sincerity. She'd kiss me on the cheek, probably feeling guilty for about 2 seconds before she texted Adam with plans for their next rendezvous. Little did she know, I was already planning my own. The hardest part of all this was pretending like nothing was wrong at work. Adam, that two-faced snake, kept up his friendly facade, slapping me on the back and sharing drinks after meetings. The more I smiled, the more I wanted to smash a whiskey glass over his head. But I stayed cool. My poker face was impeccable. Every time Adam cracked a joke or gave me that too chummy grin, I'd nod and laugh along, all while plotting how to tear his life apart. It was almost fun, in a twisted way, watching them dig their own graves. They were both so obvious, so comfortable in their little secret that they didn't even notice how close I was getting to them. A few accidental glances at Claire's phone here, a strategically placed question about Adam's whereabouts there, it was all coming together. I wasn't just going to catch them cheating. I was going to unravel their lives piece by piece. And when the time came, I'd make sure that their perfect little bubble burst in the most spectacular way possible. I just needed to set the trap. Chapter 2. The Setup, Creating the Trap. It's amazing how little people notice when they think they're getting away with something. I'm not sure if it's arrogance or just plain stupidity, but watching Claire and Adam go about their daily routine as if nothing could possibly catch up to them. It was like watching two blind mice running toward a mousetrap. Once I knew the when and the who, it was time to focus on the where. Turns out, catching cheaters isn't just about the evidence, it's about the setting. You need the right backdrop for the big reveal, a stage perfectly set for maximum humiliation. A simple confrontation wasn't going to cut it. No, I needed them to crash and burn publicly. I wanted them exposed, laid bare for everyone to see. And I had just the place in mind. Claire had this favorite cafe, quaint little place on the edge of town that served overpriced pastries and catered to the health-conscious crowd. She'd mentioned in passing how she liked to stop there for a post-workout smoothie after her so-called yoga sessions. Of course, she never invited me along, it was her me time. But I had a feeling it was more like it's time for her and Adam. Perfect. I spent the next week crafting the perfect trap, fine-tuning every detail. Step 1 was easy, tech. Fortunately, my job in IT had its perks. I'd spent years troubleshooting office systems and working through network glitches. But the real benefit? Access. Adam's work laptop, for instance. Sure, he had personal devices for his private life, but he'd been careless, very careless. His work emails, his calendar, even his location tracking from office appointments, it was all there for me to see, provided I knew where to look. And trust me, I knew exactly where to look. It didn't take much effort to install a little remote software on his machine. Something low-key, subtle enough that even someone in IT wouldn't notice unless they were really looking for it. Through it, I could keep an eye on his activities without leaving a trace. I was almost disappointed by how easy it was. By Wednesday, I was tracking Adam's every move. His calendar was a mess of corporate meetings, lunch dates, and client calls. But there, Nestled between all the work stuff were the real gems: off-site meeting, 2 p.m., personal appointment, 4:30 p.m., and the pièce de résistance, Friday, 10:30 a.m. Yoga with C. Subtle. From there, I built out step 2, surveillance. This was where I had to get a bit creative. Sure, I could have hired a private investigator, but what was the fun in that? I wanted to handle this personally. So I went full spy mode. I swung by the cafe under the guise of needing a quiet spot to work one afternoon. I made some polite conversation with the barista, tipped generously, and strategically chose a seat by the window. There, I noted the layout: tables, chairs, sightlines. Every little detail mattered. And most importantly, I identified the perfect corner to set up a tiny, unobtrusive camera. Something small enough to go unnoticed but with just enough resolution to capture the moment. I wasn't going to rely solely on that, though. No, I had bigger plans for the main event. But I'll get to that. Next, I needed to bait the trap. Adam's schedule was already predictable, but I wanted to make sure he'd have no excuse to back out. Friday was his yoga day with Claire, and that was exactly when I planned to strike. A quick anonymous email from a burner account, using some hastily gathered info about a client crisis, and Adam would be busy enough to make him flustered. Not enough to cancel his rendezvous, but enough to distract him and make him sloppy. With that in place, I set my sights on Claire. Now, Claire had a habit of leaving her phone lying around when she was busy with other things: cooking, gardening, whatever. I just needed 5 minutes alone with it. Lucky for me, she'd been on a gardening kick lately, prepping her little flower beds for autumn, which meant she'd spend a good hour out back every morning. So, one morning while she was elbow deep in soil, I grabbed her phone, just for a quick peek. Nothing too invasive, just enough to set up a forward for any new texts from Adam. Simple, really. A few taps, a little tech magic, and voila. Adam's messages would come straight to me, too. Claire wasn't much for deleting her messages, which was interesting in itself. I guess she never thought I'd look, or maybe she figured I was too trusting. Her chat history with Adam was like flipping through a bad romance novel full of cringeworthy flirtations, in-jokes, and more winky faces than I could stomach. But there was something else. In between all the banal flirting, they'd made plans for Friday morning. Same time, same place. Claire had even suggested they take things to the next level, whatever that meant. Well, I'd find out soon enough. By Thursday night, everything was in place. I had my surveillance gear ready, the cafe scouted, and their plans locked in. All I had to do was show up. But before I did that, there was one more move I had to make: gathering witnesses. The key to a good revenge is making sure the right people are watching when the bomb goes off. It's no good catching them if no one else sees it. And who better to witness the downfall of my cheating wife and my backstabbing colleague than their peers? People they'd worked with, people who'd trusted them, people who'd never let them live this down. Now, obviously, I couldn't just invite the whole office to the cafe. That would have been too obvious. But I had a better idea. I knew from office gossip that Adam and Claire's little yoga meetups weren't as private as they thought. A few coworkers had already noticed how often they worked out together, but no one had taken it seriously. That was about to change. I spent Thursday afternoon casually chatting with a couple of work buddies over coffee, steering the conversation toward Adam's fitness routine. It wasn't long before someone mentioned, offhand, how he'd been getting pretty close to Claire. I feigned surprise, raised an eyebrow, and let slip that I'd heard they were both planning to grab coffee together after yoga on Friday. You know, like a friendly little chat. The reaction was perfect, just the right amount of raised eyebrows and exchanged looks. "I bet it's more than yoga," one of the guys joked. "Bet you they're hooking up." I laughed along, even though I already knew the answer. "Maybe you should swing by the cafe tomorrow and see for yourself," I said with a wink. By the end of the conversation, I planted the seed. A few curious coworkers would just happen to be in the neighborhood tomorrow. Nothing too obvious, but enough to stir the pot. And with that, my trap was fully set. Friday morning came like a countdown to a fireworks show. I had my gear ready, my plan rehearsed. Claire left the house with a kiss on my cheek, completely unaware that this was the last time she'd walk out the door, thinking I was blissfully ignorant. I watched her drive off, feeling that slow burn of satisfaction creeping up my spine. I arrived at the cafe early, blending in with the regulars, a cup of coffee in hand. My tiny camera was hidden in the perfect spot, angled to capture the corner where Claire and Adam always sat. It wasn't enough to just know they were meeting, I needed to record it, immortalize it, for them to see later, for everyone to see. 10 minutes later, Adam strolled in, looking smug as ever. He grabbed a seat by the window, texting away, probably telling Claire how excited he was for their yoga session. I almost laughed at the ridiculousness of it all. Claire showed up not long after, all smiles and casual charm. I watched as they sat down, leaning a little too close, their conversation casual but intimate. It was almost comical how oblivious they were to the fact that they were being watched. I snapped a few photos with my phone for good measure, and then, as they got comfortable, I made my move. I walked right in, calm as ever, carrying a second cup of coffee as if it were any other day. The expression on Adam's face when he saw me was priceless, like someone had thrown a bucket of ice water over him. Claire, on the other hand, froze, her smile vanishing in an instant. "Oh, hey," I said, as if I just happened to bump into them. "Funny running into you two here. What's the occasion?" Adam fumbled for words, but Claire recovered first. "Oh, we just decided to grab a coffee after yoga." "Right," I said, looking between them with a knowing smile. "After yoga, of course." I let the silence hang for a moment, savoring the tension. "You know, it's funny. I didn't realize yoga involved so much texting." Adam's face went white, and Claire's eyes widened in shock. Before either of them could speak, I slid into the seat across from them, pulling out my phone. "You see," I said, leaning in, "I've been keeping an eye on things. And it turns out, you're both really bad at hiding secrets." The color drained from Claire's face as she realized what was happening. Adam looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. "You're probably wondering how I knew," I continued, enjoying the look of panic in their eyes. "Well, it wasn't hard. Between the messages, the sudden workout routines, and Adam's not-so-subtle calendar entries, it was like following breadcrumbs." I pulled up the surveillance footage on my phone, showing them the camera feed I'd set up. Their eyes went wide as they saw themselves on screen, chatting like nothing was wrong, unaware they'd been caught. "And just so you know," I added with a smirk, "I'm not the only one who's going to see this." As if on cue, two of our colleagues from work walked in, clearly curious but trying not to look too obvious. Adam's jaw clenched as he realized how screwed he was. Claire sat frozen, eyes darting between me, Adam, and the entrance, as if she were trying to figure out an escape route. But there wasn't one. I'd made sure of that. "Good luck explaining this to everyone," I said, standing up and giving them one last look. "You're going to need it." And with that, I walked out, leaving them to stew in the wreckage of their own making. Chapter 3. The Big Reveal, Catching Them Red-Handed. There's something about the moment when everything clicks, that second when all your carefully laid plans fall into place like clockwork. For me, that moment came just as I stepped out of the cafe, leaving Claire and Adam to marinate in their panic. I didn't need to stay. The trap had already sprung. I could feel it in the air. The weight of realization was starting to crash down on them. Claire's frozen stare, Adam's deathly pale face, they knew their time was up. But that was just the beginning. The real fun was about to start. I circled the block, taking my time. No need to rush. I wanted to give them a few minutes to stew. I pictured them inside, frantically whispering to each other, trying to figure out how much I knew, how deep they were in. Maybe Adam was already planning his next move, trying to salvage what was left of his reputation. Maybe Claire was preparing for damage control. Either way, it didn't matter. They were about to learn a valuable lesson about consequences. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I took a leisurely stroll, pretending to window shop. I glanced down another message from Adam's burner phone. The idiot still hadn't figured out that his messages were being forwarded to me. "Let's meet later to talk. I can explain everything." Explain everything? I almost laughed. What was there to explain? The footage I had of them cozying up in that cafe told me all I needed to know. Adam wasn't just a bad cheater, he was a desperate one. I could practically feel the sweat dripping off him through the screen. But that wasn't the part that made me smile. No, the best part was what was coming next. Adam thought the worst of his day was over, but he had no idea how far I was about to take this. I made my way back toward the cafe, careful to approach from a different angle this time, just in case they caught sight of me. Sure enough, as I rounded the corner, I saw them through the window. Claire had her head in her hands, looking like she was on the verge of a breakdown. Adam was hunched over, furiously typing on his phone, probably trying to come up with some pathetic excuse to explain this all away. It was time for the next phase of the plan. I'd already made sure that a few of our colleagues would be in the area, thanks to my strategic conversations the day before. I wanted witnesses. Not too many, just a handful of the right people. The kinds of people who love a juicy piece of gossip but also have a way of spreading it around like wildfire. As if on cue, I saw two of them walk by, Julie and Marcus from accounting. They'd clearly been happening to walk past, casting a few curious glances inside as they strolled by. I smiled to myself. Word was about to get around, and fast. I walked up to the cafe door just as Julie and Marcus turned to each other, their faces lighting up with interest as they spotted Adam and Claire inside. They exchanged a few hushed words before continuing down the sidewalk, but not without one last look through the window. Perfect. I stepped inside, and the little bell above the door jingled. Claire and Adam didn't even notice me at first, they were too wrapped up in their own mess. Claire was talking rapidly now, her hands gesturing wildly in front of her, and Adam was shaking his head, clearly trying to calm her down. I stood there for a moment, just watching them flail. It was almost too easy. Then I cleared my throat. Both their heads snapped up, and the color drained from their faces. Adam's phone nearly slipped from his hand, and Claire looked like she'd just seen a ghost. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything," I said, with a little too much sweetness in my voice. "Daniel." Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. Adam swallowed hard. We can explain," he stammered. His usual cocky demeanor was gone, replaced by a nervous tremor that made me almost pity him. Almost. "Oh, I'm sure you can," I replied, pulling up a chair and sitting down across from them. "But, honestly, I'm not here for an explanation." I leaned back, making myself comfortable, and glanced at Claire, who looked like she was about to crumble into a pile of guilt. "So," I said, turning my attention to Adam, "how's work been lately?" He blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift in tone. Fine, I guess?" His voice cracked, and I couldn't help but enjoy the way he was squirming. "You know," I continued, "I've always wondered what you get up to on these client meetings you're always going to. I've heard rumors." I let the last word hang in the air like a noose. Adam's eyes darted to Claire, and she shot him a panicked look. They were trapped, and they knew it. "Daniel, please," Claire started, her voice shaky. "It's not what it looks like." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like what it is." She opened her mouth to protest, but I held up a hand to stop her. No, don't worry. You don't have to explain. In fact, I'd prefer it if you didn't." I leaned in, lowering my voice. "I'm not here to listen to your excuses. I'm here to make sure you both understand what's coming next." Adam swallowed again, his eyes wide. "Look, we can work this out, man. It doesn't have to go any further than this. We can figure something out." "Figure something out?" I repeated, feigning surprise. "Oh, Adam, buddy, we're way past that. You see, I've already figured everything out." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, holding it up for them to see. On the screen was the surveillance footage from earlier, the two of them sitting there, laughing and chatting like nothing could touch them. Adam's face went pale as a sheet. Claire gasped, her hand covering her mouth as she realized just how deep they were in. I could see the gears turning in her head, her brain scrambling for a way out, but there was none. "And this," I said, tapping a few buttons on my phone, "is already backed up. Several copies, actually, just in case you were thinking of trying something stupid." Claire's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out toward me. Daniel, please. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Oh, I know, I interrupted, cutting her off mid-sentence. Trust me, Claire, I know you made a mistake. And now, you're going to have to live with it. Adam sat frozen, his jaw clenched, staring at me like a deer caught in headlights. He was smart enough to know there was no talking his way out of this one. I turned my attention back to him. And you, I said, I've already made sure that your little extracurricular activities at work have been well documented. You didn't think I'd stop at just catching you with my wife, did you? Adam's eyes widened in terror. He opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off. Did you really think you were so untouchable? So clever? You think no one at the office noticed the disappearing act you pull every time Claire texts you? Or how you always manage to slip out early on Fridays? Come on, Adam, you've got to give people more credit. Adam's face contorted into a mix of fear and anger. You can't just destroy my career like this, he hissed, his voice low and panicked. I smiled, leaning back in my chair. Oh, Adam, I think you'll find that I can. And I will. Claire started crying in earnest now, her hands trembling as she tried to reach for me. Daniel, please, she begged, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry. I'll do anything. Just, please don't ruin us. I looked at her for a moment, taking in the desperation in her eyes. It was hard to reconcile this sobbing, broken woman with the one who had so confidently lied to my face for months. The one who had thrown away 10 years of marriage for a cheap fling. Us? I repeated, my voice sharp. Claire, there hasn't been an us for a long time. You made sure of that. She sobbed harder, but I didn't flinch. I wasn't about to let her tears cloud my judgment. Not now. Not after everything she'd done. I stood up, pocketing my phone and looking down at the two of them one last time. I hope you're ready for the fallout, I said, my voice steady. Because this is only the beginning. With that, I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving them behind to deal with the consequences of their actions. As I stepped out into the cool morning air, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I had done it. I had exposed them, laid everything bare for the world to see. And now, all that was left was to watch them crumble under the weight of their own deceit. But the best part? They still had no idea just how much worse things were about to get. Chapter 4. Aftermath. Tables turned and justice served. It's funny how fast everything can fall apart. One minute, you think you've got everything under control, and the next, your entire life's in shambles. I'd always wondered what it would look like to see someone's world come crashing down. Now I knew. I didn't need to follow them after I left the cafe. The wheels were already in motion. In fact, I didn't see Claire or Adam again for a few days. I figured they were busy scrambling to put out fires, or at least trying to. But the beauty of my plan was that I didn't need to watch. The damage was happening on its own. The first sign of trouble for Adam came the following Monday at work. I strolled into the office, calm as ever, like I hadn't just detonated a bomb on my personal life. Adam, on the other hand, looked like a walking corpse. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes rumpled, and there was a nervous twitch in his movements. He barely glanced at me as I walked past his desk, and I could almost hear the panic swirling inside his head. I had to hand it to him, he was trying. Really, he was. He was still sitting there, pretending to work, tapping away at his keyboard like nothing was wrong. But I knew better, and so did everyone else. Word had spread faster than I'd even expected. Julie and Marcus, the two I'd so conveniently nudged into the cafe on Friday, had done their job well. By Monday, the office was buzzing with whispers about Adam and Claire. It wasn't just idle gossip, either. People were digging deeper, questioning Adam's work habits, wondering how long he'd been sneaking around. It didn't take long for someone to connect the dots between his yoga sessions and his mysteriously flexible schedule. The real nail in the coffin came later that afternoon. I was sitting at my desk, pretending to be engrossed in a spreadsheet, when I overheard a hushed conversation between Adam and our boss, Karen. She'd called him into her office for a chat, and from the way Adam's shoulders slumped when he came out, it wasn't a pleasant one. Karen didn't like drama. She especially didn't like office relationships that could blow up in her face. And Adam? He was a liability now. It wasn't just that he'd been caught sleeping with a coworker's wife, it was the fact that he'd been using company time and resources to do it. I had made sure of that. You see, while Adam was busy trying to cover his tracks with Claire, I'd been quietly gathering evidence of his little side hustle. Nothing major, just enough to show that he'd been slacking off, using company money for personal trips, and generally not pulling his weight. I'd dropped it all into Karen's inbox over the weekend, just in time for her Monday morning coffee. By Tuesday, Adam was gone. Not in some dramatic, box-carrying out of the office kind of way, no, it was quieter than that. A brief email from HR announcing his resignation, followed by the removal of his name from the company's internal directories. I couldn't help but smile as I read the email. He hadn't even lasted a full day after our boss found out. The office gossip mill churned harder than ever, but Adam had slipped out the back door, tail between his legs, too embarrassed to face the fallout. As for Claire, her unraveling was even messier. I didn't confront her again after the cafe. I didn't need to. She came to me. It was Thursday night, about a week after the whole thing blew up, when she showed up at the house. I wasn't surprised. I'd been expecting her to make a desperate move sooner or later. She had nowhere else to go. From what I'd heard through the grapevine, Adam had ghosted her the minute he realized how deep the mess was. Smart, really. Cut your losses and run. When Claire knocked on the door, I took my time answering. I could see her through the window, disheveled, makeup streaked from crying, clutching a small bag like she'd been kicked out of a cheap motel. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I opened the door just enough to see her face, leaning against the frame with a casual indifference that I knew would sting. Daniel, she started, her voice cracking. Please, can we talk? I didn't say anything at first. Just looked at her, letting the silence drag on until she squirmed under my gaze. I don't think there's much left to say, Claire, I finally said, my voice cold. She bit her lip, her eyes welling up with fresh tears. I made a mistake, she whispered. I know I screwed up. But I need you to understand, it wasn't supposed to be like this. Like what? I asked, folding my arms. Getting caught? Or losing everything because of it? Her face crumpled, and she took a shaky breath. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It was just, I don't know, a stupid distraction. I never meant to hurt you. The words sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced them in the mirror before coming over. But that was the thing about apologies, they don't mean much when they're too little, too late. You didn't mean to hurt me? I repeated, laughing bitterly. Claire, you didn't just hurt me. You wrecked everything we had. And for what? Adam? She flinched at his name, her eyes darting to the side. He's not part of this anymore, she mumbled. He's gone. Of course he's gone, I snapped. You really think he was going to stick around and deal with the fallout? He's a coward, Claire. Just like you. She let out a small sob, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm sorry, she said again, but the words felt hollow. I don't know what to do. I don't have anywhere to go. Ah, there it was. The real reason she was here. She wasn't just looking for an apology, she was looking for a lifeline. Adam had ditched her, and now she was crawling back, hoping I'd take pity on her. I stared at her for a moment, letting that realization sink in. Claire, the woman who'd thrown away our marriage, now standing in front of me, broken and desperate. It was poetic, really. I've already filed for divorce, I said, my voice flat. You should get a lawyer. Her eyes widened, and she shook her head. No, please, Daniel, we can fix this. We can. There's nothing to fix, I cut in, my tone sharp. It's over. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it. She collapsed into sobs, her shoulders shaking as she stood there on the porch, crying like it would somehow change anything. But I felt nothing, just a cold, empty sense of finality. I had done what I needed to do. The anger, the betrayal, it had burned itself out. All that was left was the inevitable end. After a few moments of watching her break down, I sighed and stepped back inside. You should go, I said, closing the door halfway. This isn't your home anymore. She looked up at me, eyes wide and filled with a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Where am I supposed to go?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm sure you'll figure something out," I replied, not unkindly, but with a finality that left no room for debate. And with that, I shut the door, leaving her standing on the porch, alone in the darkness. For the first time in months, I felt free. There was no going back. No more lies, no more secrets. Just the clean slate I'd been craving, the fresh start I deserved. The next few weeks were surprisingly quiet. The office slowly moved on from the gossip about Adam's downfall, and Claire's name stopped coming up in conversations. People had short attention spans when it came to scandal, and once the shock wore off, everyone returned to their routines. As for me, I took it one day at a time. There was something liberating about watching everything crumble and then walking away unscathed. I didn't need to rebuild anything, I just needed to move forward. And so I did. Claire and Adam were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, but that wasn't my problem anymore. I'd made sure they got what they deserved, and now, I was free to live my life on my terms. In the end, justice wasn't just about catching them in the act. It was about making sure they understood that actions have consequences. And for once, I had the last word. I was more than fine with that.